1 minute ago. The silence in Brussels has been broken in a way that no one inside was prepared for. And what is now emerging from behind closed doors is not just another policy disagreement, but the outline of a structural shift so profound that it threatens to redraw the boundaries of national sovereignty across the entire European Union. Before we roll the footage, just one thing. If you enjoy our work, drop a like and hit subscribe. Over 98% of you are watching without subscribing. Let's change that right now. It's free for you, but it fuels everything we do. Subscribed, perfect. Now enjoy the video. With stepping forward not as a negotiator but as a direct challenger to a system she now openly describes as engineered control rather than democratic coordination, and the timing of her move. It had coming just hours after a classified financial framework tied to the BIGAN circulating among a small network of journalists and institutional analysts has transformed what might have remained an obscure internal debate into a full-scale political crisis that is now unfolding in real time across multiple capitals. What triggered this explosion was not a speech or a vote, but a document. A dense and highly technical financial blueprint that sources linked to and describe as part of a long-term stabilisation mechanism quietly developed over the past 18 months. And while such mechanisms are not unusual in the aftermath of economic shocks, and what made this one different, what made it dangerous, was the scope of authority it proposed to transfer away from national governments and into a centralised structure operating under the institutional umbrella of Brussels, with provisions that, according to early interpretations from analysts affiliated with OAT, would allow for direct intervention in national fiscal decisions under conditions that remain deliberately undefined, creating a legal grey zone that could be activated without the kind of democratic scrutiny traditionally required for changes of this magnitude. Meloni's response to this discovery was not cautious or procedural, but immediate and confrontational, as she authorised the controlled release of key excerpts from the document to a select group of independent researchers and media outlets, and ensuring that the narrative would not be shaped solely by official channels, but instead driven by public scrutiny and external analysis. And within hours, the fragments that appeared online began to paint a picture that was both incomplete and deeply unsettling, revealing references to a liquidity instrument tentatively valued at over €2 trillion and internally coded as ECHO7. A designation that, while bureaucratic in appearance, has now become a focal point for a growing wave of suspicion about what exactly is being constructed behind the scenes of European governance. As economists from and began dissecting the available data, a pattern started to emerge that suggested ECHO 7 was not merely a financial safeguard, but a mechanism designed to centralise decision-making authority during periods classified as systemic risk. A term that appears repeatedly throughout the document without ever being precisely defined, thereby granting the overseeing body a level of discretionary power that critics argue could be used to override national budgets, redirect funding streams, and enforce compliance with broader policy objectives without requiring direct approval from elected parliaments, effectively creating a parallel governance structure that operates above the traditional checks and balances of the Union. The reaction across Italy was swift and emotionally charged as political leaders, regional officials and ordinary citizens began to interpret the implications of the leak not as an abstract economic adjustment, but as a tangible threat to national autonomy. And with protests reigniting in major cities and public figures calling for immediate clarification from Brussels, while Meloni herself delivered a televised address in which she framed the issue in stark and uncompromising terms, arguing that the proposed mechanism represented a shift from cooperation to coercion and warning that once such powers are institutionalised, they are rarely relinquished voluntarily. A statement that resonated far beyond Italy's borders and quickly began to influence the political discourse in other member states. Inside the I2, the atmosphere has grown increasingly volatile as lawmakers demand transparency and accountability. with several committees initiating emergency reviews and calling for a suspension of ongoing budget negotiations until the full details of Echo 7 are disclosed. While behind the scenes, officials within the are reportedly engaged in urgent consultations aimed at assessing both the economic and political risks of the proposal, particularly in light of new polling data indicating a sharp decline in public trust towards centralised EU financial governance. A development that could have significant implications for domestic politics in Germany and beyond. Complicating matters further is the emergence of evidence suggesting that not all member states are being treated equally within the framework of Echo 7, as investigative reporting by has uncovered a series of undisclosed meetings between Commission officials and representatives from meetings that appear to have focused on negotiating a modified version of the mechanism with adjusted compliance requirements. Raising the possibility that certain countries may be granted preferential terms in exchange for political support. A strategy that, if confirmed, would not only undermine the principle of unity within the Union, but also validate concerns that the system is designed to reward alignment and penalise dissent. Meloni's reaction to these revelations has been both strategic and aggressive, as she moves to build a coalition of like-minded leaders who share her concerns about the concentration of power in Brussels, initiating direct communications with and engaging in high-level outreach to officials in and bypassing traditional diplomatic channels in favour of more immediate and personal dialogue. And while the full extent of these discussions remains unclear, early indications suggest that they are beginning to influence national positions. And with France in particular facing mounting pressure from domestic constituencies to reassess its stance on the proposed mechanism. Within the Commission itself, the response has been notably restrained, with postponing a scheduled press appearance and offering no immediate comment on the leak, a silence that has only intensified speculation about the internal dynamics of the institution and the degree to which its leadership anticipated the current backlash, while anonymous sources describe an environment of growing unease and defensive recalibration as officials attempt to manage both the narrative and the underlying policy challenges now exposed to public view. At the same time, legal experts associated with institutions such as the are beginning to examine the constitutional implications of Echo 7, raising questions about its compatibility with existing EU treaties and the potential for judicial intervention, particularly if it can be demonstrated that the mechanism bypasses established ratification processes or infringes upon the sovereign rights of member states, a scenario that could lead to a prolonged legal battle with far-reaching consequences for the future of European integration. Yet even as the political and legal dimensions of the crisis continue to unfold, a deeper and more unsettling question is starting to take shape among analysts and observers who have studied the leaked material in greater detail, focusing on a brief but highly suggestive reference near the end of the document that alludes to a second phase of implementation involving cross-border asset integration, a concept that, while not fully explained, and implies a level of economic coordination that goes beyond fiscal policy and into the realm of shared control over strategic resources, raising the possibility that Echo 7 is only the first step in a broader transformation of the European economic system. This possibility has not gone unnoticed by Meloni, who has begun to frame the debate in increasingly existential terms, suggesting that the current confrontation is not merely about a single policy proposal, but about the direction of the Union itself and the balance between integration and independence that has defined its evolution for decades. And as her message gains traction among both political leaders and the general public, the pressure on Brussels to respond with clarity and transparency is becoming more intense with each passing hour. So now the situation stands at a critical juncture, with multiple pathways forward and no clear consensus on which one will be taken. As member states weigh the benefits of collective stability against the risks of centralised authority, institutions struggle to maintain credibility in the face of growing scepticism, and citizens across Europe begin to question assumptions that have long been taken for granted about how decisions are made and who ultimately holds power within the Union. What happens next will depend not only on the actions of leaders and institutions, but on the ability of the system itself to adapt to a level of scrutiny and resistance that it may not have been designed to withstand. And as new information continues to emerge and alliances continue to shift, the outcome of this assessment remains uncertain, leaving open a series of questions that will define the next chapter of this unfolding story. Is Echo 7 a necessary evolution in the face of global instability? Or is it the argas of a centralised structure that could erode the very foundations of national sovereignty within Europe? Will the coalition forming around Italy succeed in forcing a reconsideration of the proposal, or will internal divisions allow it to proceed in a modified form? And perhaps most importantly, what lies within the undisclosed elements of Phase 2 that have yet to be revealed? Stay with this story as it develops, because the next disclosure could fundamentally change the narrative once again. And if you want to understand not just what is happening, but why it matters, make sure you are here for the next update. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because in a moment like this, where information is power and timing is everything, missing the next piece of the puzzle could mean missing the truth entirely.